think for all of us, right? If you think about your early career, you're successful because of your expertise allowing you to deliver a result, right? Because I understand accounting practices, I can, do the work and do it extremely well. As we move into broader roles, broader in scope, scope of impact, scope of influence, it requires us to have a broader mindset, to understand things beyond our own capabilities.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Human First Leadership. I'm Lauren Rueve, Senior Coach at Mindmaven, where we help startup leaders and venture capitalists 10 times their productivity, save 12 hours a week, and achieve true greatness by focusing on relationships. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Rosina Racioppi, President and CEO of AscentPoint Leadership. She spent more than 25 years helping organizations build stronger leaders, more inclusive cultures, and teams that actually perform. Rosina has advised Fortune 1000 executives on how to align leadership, talent, and strategy. And today we're going to dig into what that looks like in a world shaped by AI. Rosina, thanks so much for being here. Let's go ahead and get started.
Inviting me, Lauren.
Excited to get started. So we're going to kick things off with a quote that we found on your LinkedIn bio. We believe the success of any organization depends on its people. How do you define human first leadership today? And how does that belief shape the way that you help leaders unlock their potential?
In many ways, Lauren, it's the same as it always has been, right? A company can have great products and great innovation, but if we don't have the people that can guide the company to achieve the results that it needs, that the customer demands of them, then you can have something great, but no one's going to know about it, right? So we have to put people in the center of it because any organization needs to focus on how do I make certain that the people who are part of delivering our expertise and our product have the skills necessary today and tomorrow to continue to grow the needs of the business, to make sure we're always, as Stephen Covey says, sharpening the saw, right, of our capabilities so that we're ahead of the curve for what's needed in our industry or by our customers.
And I know when we spoke in our first conversation, Rosina, you shared a little bit about how AI is impacting, this kind of trajectory. Talk to me a little bit about how you feel about that AI and human component.
I think we've been hearing for the past few years about the impact of AI. And for us, our focus is it's not an either or, is it AI or people, but rather, how do we maximize the impact or the potential that AI can have as this tool for how we operate by ensuring that the people, the human side of our business, have the skills and understanding of how to maximize the impact AI has on our business. So, for example, AI is a tool, right? It's basically a tool, a very phenomenal tool, but it's a tool nonetheless. What are the skills that are needed? How do people collaborate using AI? How do they make sure, just on a fundamental level, that they're guiding AI in an appropriate way? How are we teaching people how to use and leverage AI in a way that aligns with our organizational values and what we want to be known for? So, I often feel like the conversation is it people or is it AI? And I don't think it's an either or conversation, but rather a yes and conversation. In order to maximize AI, what do we need to make sure our people are capable of? What are the human skills that are needed to accentuate and amplify the impact of AI?
Couldn't agree more. And I think you brought up some really good points. I think it's really interesting, Rosina. Our conversations at Mindmaven have evolved in a way where people sort of maybe initially experience that AI might be this wonderful, perfect solution, and then they're running into the issues of still being the bottleneck or not understanding what to delegate or how to delegate now because of these new options. So I think you highlighted a lot of really interesting themes there. Would you say you have a client example where somebody came in really focused on the AI and you had to remind them of that human component?
Well, I would say that in the work that we do, so the programs that we offer at AscentPoint Leadership is really focused on leadership development. And we focus on development at three crucial stages of a person's career: early career in our Empower programs, mid career in our lead programs, and at the executive level in our forums. So we focus on all tools and resources that organizations deploy. And how do you integrate that into your leadership capabilities? And AI has been a stream throughout all of our programs, a steady conversation. And the conversations that of recent, right, I would say within the last 6 months, have really been focused on, as a leader, how do you create the framework in which AI can be deployed effectively in my organization? So the leaders need to say, yeah, here's a tool and here's the framework. Leaders take the ownership, right, of guiding the utilization of this tool to make sure that it's meeting the organizational values and the needs of the business.
Absolutely. And, bringing it back to another post from AscentPoint, and this one said, while the mechanics of AI are helpful, humanics still matters. Leadership isn't just about automation and efficiency. It's about empathy, ethics, and judgment, qualities no machine can replicate. So, of course, we agree with this. What are some of the tensions that you've seen leaders face as they're trying to balance this, like, really strong desire for speed and efficiency, automation, performance, with that human side of leadership?
Well, I think that we've seen this just in this post-COVID workplace that we're a part of, right? I think that what we hear from the leaders that we work with and the individuals that are in our program, it's the pace of business seems to be at hyperspeed, right? There's not enough time in the day. I would say that it's a feeling of overwhelm, might be the best way to describe it. Overwhelmed by the technology, overwhelmed by the work. And I think what happens is then we lose sight of what are the core areas that we need to focus on. What are the things that truly will be impactful for our organization and for our customers, and stay focused on those things. So I think that the biggest challenge is, how do I ensure that I'm not distracted, right? I can get lost in the haze of AI and I'm going to say the things that are on the periphery, and then lose sight of what truly is important. So we try and stay focused on, in the work that we do with our corporate partners as well as the individuals in our programs, is how do I really not pay attention to the noise, but get focused, laser focused on what is critical. And if I can stay focused on what is critical, both from an objective point of view as well as my capabilities, I can ensure that I will be successful.
And I'm sure, again, wholeheartedly agree there, Rosina. We have some practices around this as well, around recentering. And in our earlier conversation, you referenced this difference between activity and connection. What are some of those pragmatic tips that you give people? And they may differ depending on what stage that you're coaching at, but just curious, some of those pragmatic ideas for our listeners around how to differentiate between when they're really getting stuck in that noise.
My one piece of advice that I always give people is to pay attention to the tension, right? The tension, the resistance, right? In getting things done, in getting an idea heard, and to be mindful of what is that about? Like, why am I not being successful? I think in this post-COVID workplace where we're hybrid and remote work, and oftentimes we can feel very isolated in the work that we're doing, we lose sight of the importance of connections. And by connections, I mean in two main areas that are critical for us as professional people to have, is to have a robust network. And I know people will poo-poo like, oh, it's so artificial networking. Well, not if it's done properly. We should have a strong set of relationships, might be a way to think about it, that offer you different perspectives, challenge your understanding, right? You need, I think about when my early career, I worked in, I headed up HR in organizations. I always had a strong relationship with people that were in operations, that were in sales, that were in different parts of the business. And they served multiple purposes for me. They helped me understand more broadly what was going on in the businesses so that I could think about in my staff role, what do I need to do to support the businesses better? But it also helped me understand what might happen in the future so I can prepare myself. So I often advise people, if you're often surprised about what happens in your business, what people do, what is going on, that means your network is faulty. So think about those people that think and see things differently than you and start forming relationships. The other piece on connection is you need to have individuals who are your developmental coaches, right? The people that you can talk about where you want to go, what you want to do, what you're seeing for your own career, and that they can be your thought partner, your career coach, whatever, however you want to think about it. But if you don't have those developmental relationships, you may be destined to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
I love that you highlighted relationships. We're firm believers here at Mindmaven that relationships are crucial on anyone's journey to success. And I think you hit on a few key points, especially the one being that people have this belief that it feels very artificial, but that is actually coming from a way of not doing it appropriately. And then the other thing that I think would be interesting to explore further, you highlighted this element of the importance of diverse perspectives. And that brings us back to in a recent interview, as recently as January 2026, you said leadership is not about executing every solution. It's about creating an environment where diverse perspectives, expertise, and ideas come together to deliver results. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like in practice. And I think it ties into some of what you shared just recently, but keep going on that thread for us.
Well, I think for all of us, right? If you think about your early career, you're successful because of your expertise allowing you to deliver a result, right? Because I understand accounting practices, I can, do the work and do it extremely well. As we move into broader roles, broader in scope of impact, scope of influence, it requires us to have a broader mindset, to understand things beyond our own capabilities. And I think sometimes people struggle with like what I know and my perspective isn't enough, right? So we see it as a negative. But in fact, it's impossible for anyone to be the sole purveyor of all knowledge and perspectives to allow us to get things done. And in fact, it's easier if we try and do it kind of as a collective, right? I think for myself, I had that epiphany when I was moving from kind of a first level manager into a bigger scope role that has, and I kept trying to like force my way, getting everybody to do it my way because my way was the right way, right? And I had a gentleman in we were in a leadership development class say to me, Rosina, I love working with you, but I don't think I would like being in the foxhole with you. And I said to him, well, why? He goes, well, you don't listen. And I thought, well, no, I do listen. But what I was listening for people to tell me that I was right, my way was right. And it helped me understand that while I had a point of view, while I had a solution that I thought was correct, it was easier for me to go into a meeting with a group of people and say, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas on how we can solve this problem. And that my job wasn't to come up with the solution, but my job was to orchestrate that solution through everybody's ideas. My knowledge, my perspective allowed me to be the orchestrator of the solution, not the person that came up with the solution. And while that's a nuance, I see so many leaders struggle with that, right? Because I wanted to say that it was my solution. But when you can let go of that as part of your identity, and you can say, I can bring a great group of people, we challenge each other, And through that conversation, that constructive dialogue, we are able to come up with great solutions for our organization. That is a huge transition, but it takes a lot of self-control not to jump ahead, right? And say, well, here's what we're going to do, but let the solution come from the group.
I love that. And I think it is an important nuance, Rosina, because we think about you highlighted this attribution to identities. I think that's one component of it, but also this belief that to be a leader, we have to have the answer, right? And so beyond just this desire to be right, I think there's a fundamental, maybe misconception that leaders need to be the ones with the answer versus being ones to orchestrate that solution.
I think if you think about, as you grow as a leader, you're further and further removed from your education, right? Whatever it might be. But you're not removed from your curiosity. And that to me is probably the most important competency as a leader. Not just curious about the potential for your organization or the potential for your business, but curious about how others are seeing situation, right? Curious about how individuals maybe that are in the manufacturing on the front lines, how they're seeing things versus someone who maybe is in a professional role. And just using that curiosity to help inform how you're putting ideas together, solutions together, strategies together, right? That curiosity opens you up to a world of possibilities.
Love that. And that's curiosity is so fundamental to our coaching as well. I'm curious, what are some tactical ways that you encourage leaders to maybe explore bringing more curiosity into their leadership style, or ways when leaders can tell they're not being as curious as they could be? What are some tactical ways our listeners might be able to apply that?
There's a book that I often recommend, and it's a book you can read in probably about, 30 minutes. It's called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And it fundamentally says that we tend to ask questions from two different points of view. We ask questions to prove that I'm right, to validate my point of view, my opinion, or I ask questions to learn. And so I suggest that you think about and just be mindful of what kinds of questions do you ask? Are you asking and leading questions just so that people affirm your point of view? Or are you truly asking questions like, gee, we have this situation where we need to develop XYZ. What do you think would be the best two steps that we can take to, create a plan? What would you suggest? Right? It's asking those types of questions doesn't mean that you're less capable. It just means you're open to other ideas that then percolate other ideas, right? It's a bit of, innovation chemistry, right? If we can start by asking questions and with curiosity, you don't know really what the end result will be, but you're going to be further along than if you just do it by yourself.
That's brilliant. So change your questions, change your life. And it was the two fundamental differences in how we ask questions was questions to affirm our current perspective and questions to learn. It feels really familiar. I feel like I've read it years back, but it's been a little bit, so I probably need a refresher myself. In that same interview we were just talking about, that same Medium interview, you referenced your book, Relationships Matter, and your belief that leadership growth doesn't happen in isolation, and the importance of relationships along that leadership journey as well. Can you share a personal example from your career where a relationship fundamentally shaped how you lead today? You shared one earlier example, but I'd love to hear another example.
Um, Yeah, I've been very fortunate that I've had leaders that I've worked with that have allowed me space to grow and provided feedback along the way that informed and helped me evolve kind of my point of view on being a leader. The woman who started our organization 33 years ago was a phenomenal mentor, friend, and coach, right? And one of the things that Jean often did at the end of a meeting is she would take a few minutes and say, gee, what do you think went really well today? Like, what were the things that, we need to hone in on if we want to build kind of that expertise? And we would chat a little bit about that. And then what happened that you don't want to repeat, right? And we would talk about that. And that's so simple, right? What worked well? What do we want to avoid? Um, and I often think that sometimes as managers, we make it seem like this is such a big conversation, and we don't have it frequently enough to really inform people's growth and development. But if you just take a few minutes at the end of a project, at the end of a meeting, and say, gee, what went well? And notice what went well is all the good stuff, right? And what's one or two things you would do differently, right? And I think it's that mindset that we need to, that we need to propel growth. And what is needed today may be very different 2 months from now. But if we have that consistent conversations that are meaningful, that helps people know that you care about them, you care about their growth, and you're there to support them and have those discussions. So that helped me understand when I started working with Jean, I was running one of the regions, and then I eventually became COO, and then I bought the business from her. In each one of those roles, it required me to be different, to behave differently because my role was different. How do I cooperate with other people? How do I get alignment? Those simple practices allowed me to navigate those transitions and bring people along with me to make sure that they were aligned with the vision that I had for the business.
So simple and so powerful. I love that. And I love you hit on another key theme that I think is important with that practice is the velocity that it can bring with doing it regularly versus, as an example, we might see a lot of leaders only giving feedback once a year or twice a year. And so their team is living in a vacuum in terms of areas of improvement versus something as simple as that practice. What went well? What could we do better? Just bringing that awareness to it on a day-to-day basis.
We see in research, Gallup did a great study a few years ago, and Gallup, they were looking at what are the things that companies can do if they wanted to have outstanding customer satisfaction. And they did a global survey of all these organizations, and what they found, the one thing that companies can do to ensure that they have outstanding customer satisfaction is have their managers provide meaningful feedback on a consistent basis. And,
Love that.
and I think that is something that gets lost, right? Managers have probably the hardest jobs. Think of middle managers in organizations in today's business that are so erratic, so pressurized, right? They're so focused on getting the work done that they set aside, oh, I'll talk to them later. I'll talk to my team later. And then, like plants that don't get watered, people who don't get attention tend to die on the vine too. Or they leave, or they're still there, but they're not working at their best. And so I think as leaders, as managers, what we focus on in our work, we actually have manager forums where we help managers understand how do I provide that feedback on a consistent basis? How do I provide aspirational guidance to individuals so that not only am I giving them feedback, but I'm also helping them understand what are the things they should focus on to evolve their capabilities for what the needs of the business are? And then how do I coach them? What's a coaching model? And we've created a very effective coaching model that we use that I'm sure you have a strong model as well, but it's important for managers to have that skill set so that they're helping individuals understand how they can grow and evolve their capabilities.
Absolutely. And the other thing I find really interesting as you were talking through that is how aligned our perspectives are on that feedback is a gift versus I think a lot of people, especially in our coaching, have a certain level of reluctance or hesitation to giving the feedback, the sort of a discomfort when they first start getting used to giving regular feedback, almost through the lens, Rosina, of feeling like they're going to make the person feel bad. And I'm curious if you have much experience with that as well in your practice. But I find that resistance is oftentimes the first thing that we have to work through.
Yeah, I hear that all the time. Like, I'm afraid, I don't want to hurt their feelings. And I always take a step back and say, well, why are you giving them the feedback? Well, because I care about their success. Well, then say that. I'm giving you this feedback because I care about your success. And I'm concerned that you may get defensive. So sometimes if you start with that intention and then have a conversation, we have to own, each of us has to own our own development. And it's the other thing so we focus on helping managers provide that feedback. So I believe that you shouldn't wait for someone to give you feedback. When I did my research, when I was doing my graduate work at Penn, I looked at the power of mentoring relationships to an individual's growth and development. And one of the things that we focus on in our programs is helping people articulate how they ask for feedback. You shouldn't just say, may I have some feedback, Lauren? It would be better to say, gee, Lauren, I'm really curious about, in our conversation, what's one or two things that you thought went really well? And then what's one thing I could have done differently in the conversation that would have made it more effective? Now, our work is done, right? I can't go back and redo it. What it does two things for me, asking feedback in this way. It affirms how you value the expertise that I bring to the table, right? And oftentimes individuals undervalue the things that other people value and they do in their work, right? So it just helps me and informs my thinking. And then it gives me an opportunity. I can't go back and redo the work, but it gives me an opportunity next time I'm doing similar work. Maybe I'll shift and evolve how I approach it, how I communicate it. So if we as individuals create the habit of asking effectively for feedback, then we don't have to wait for people to tell us things. We're constantly asking questions that informs our thinking, and then we can own, how we gather that and what we do with it.
I think that's so important. And you highlighted this distinction of oftentimes we hear that the onus of the responsibility is on a manager, but really kind of thinking about it more as this two-way street where that individual contributor does have a lot of ownership over their own career trajectory, over their own development, much more even than their manager. And so taking a stance of that, proactively asking for feedback, even if you maybe are in a situation where your manager isn't super comfortable yet giving it. So I love that. Well, Rosina, this has been lovely. I'd love to just open the floor and say if there's anything else you want to leave our listeners with, or anything else from your work that you feel has really impacted your trajectory. What would you leave our listeners with?
I think I would leave them with to just think about the relationships that you have created and how they support your growth and development. Are you surrounded by people that just affirm you, which is lovely? Or do you have growth relationships? They need to challenge your thinking, help you get to a higher ground, if you will, right? Because they're challenging your thinking, they're pushing you a little bit further. It can be uncomfortable, but growth and comfort don't coexist. So if you want to grow, you need to put yourself in situations that may be uncomfortable for a moment, but it won't be for the long term.
Absolutely. Well, it's been lovely to have you. Of course, in the show notes, we'll have links where people can reach you. And we mentioned your book, Relationships Matter. Where is the best way that you like people to reach out if people have follow-up questions as a result of our conversation?
They can feel free to reach out via LinkedIn. They can look at our website, AscentPoint Leadership, and contact me through that as well. Any questions, would love to connect.
Thanks so much for being here, Rosina.
Thank you, Lauren.
Have a great day.